Okay, so I'm going to replace the rear shocks on the Jeep Cherokee. We noticed that it needed front and rears. I said we're going to change these. So we're going to take off these 20-year-old shocks and put on some nice brand new Bilsteins. So I think that should work a lot better, might even look a little better, and probably even work better if I put them on the right way. So these Bilsteins are designed for this application. These are a gas charged shock absorber, meaning that if I compress it, it'll expand on its own. And we can see it coming back up on its own. Anytime we install gas shock absorbers, we actually want to do this with them before we install them on the vehicle to make sure that they're charged properly. So again, want to make sure it works, want to make sure it expands before I install it on the vehicle. If this was a regular hydraulic shock absorber, it would not expand on its own. So the gas inside is an inert gas, and the reason why we use gas inside shock absorbers is so that they don't aerate, because the gas will not mix with the oil and it keeps it from foaming. If I have non-gas charged shock absorbers, it allows them to foam. There's two kinds of gas shock absorbers, high pressure gas and low pressure gas. This is actually a low pressure gas shock absorber. High pressure gas shock absorbers that are used in some older Mercedes, I can't even compress that way. They're very, very high pressure. So this gas in no way helps the suspension height. It strictly has to do with dampening force and keeping the oil from aerating, which gives better shock absorber performance. So in order to replace the shock, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring a screw jack over. I'm going to support this side of the vehicle. I'm going to take this bolt off first, and then I'm going to take the two bolts off up top. The reason why I don't want to just go in and take the two bolts off the top first with this hanging, as I take the threads out, when I get down to the last thread or two, the spring pressure and the way the suspension will pull the threads out, and I'll damage the nuts that are captured where these bolts go into. So I always want to take the load off of it first before I take it apart. So I'm going to use the screw jack and screw this up and wait till I compress the shock. Once I compress the shock, I can really do either side. I just always do this side first, this side last, just out of habit. And that also lets me know that I tightened up the top if I put this on. So a lot of what we do on cars is habits. If I do the same habit every time, I don't need to think about it. And let me tell you, for me, that's a big advantage. So let me get the screw jack over here, start lifting this up, and we'll take this lower nut off. Okay, so this is my screw jack or pole jack. And you can see it's a single pole, very flexible, has a solid metal base. I'm going to spin this up. These are rated at picking up about 750 pounds, so they're pretty substantial, normally 3/4 of a ton. Has a ball bearing here that allows me to easily spin it. I can also lift it up and spin it down. And I want to get my hand out of there before things get exciting. And I actually want to move this to the outside here. I don't want to lift it here because I'm putting more force compared to where the spring is. I want to go out here close to the out. I could actually go all the way here to the outside, except for I'd be hitting my tire. So I want to still be able to spin this around to lift it up. So I'm just going to cradle this. And I'm going to spin this until I get some movement. And I got some nice movement here, so I've got a little bit of compression. I've compressed the shock a little bit. I've taken all the load off of those bolts. So now I'm going to take this off. In order to do that, I'm going to use an impact gun and my 19mm socket. I love flex sockets. Now you got to be careful with flex sockets, because if you don't have a hold of them, they can fling stuff all over the place. But at the same token, they give me a lot of flexibility as far as getting to something. So over here, I don't need to be straight on. I keep my hand around it to keep it from flexing, and pops right off, and I got my washer. For my upper bolts, I'm also going to use an extension. Now this is a special extension. It goes from 1/2-inch drive at one side to 3/8 drive on the other side. So these automatically reduce torque. They also allow me to get into very tight places. Now normally you use an impact socket at the end. The problem is if I use the impact socket, a lot of times it gets in the way of what I'm trying to take off. So I actually use a chrome socket, not meant for impact use, with an impact gun. But because I've reduced the torque on it, these really hold up real well. Plus it's snap-on, and they're happy to give me another one. So there is something to be said for buying good tools that you buy once for the lifetime. So let me walk these out. If you notice, when I was using it, I was holding this so it didn't get completely out of control. Last thing I want to do is connect this to something and just pull the gun. The whole thing's going to go everywhere. You got to hold it, keep it steady. That's why this is so shiny. It started out black. you can see it's not pure black anymore. It is still an industrial finish. So I've got my one screw here. So now I have this off. I can pull this towards me, and I got the old shock out. Now, if you notice when I look at the shock, this is not perfectly level. It's angled. It's angled because of how it mounts underneath the vehicle. So when I get my new shock absorber, we can see, again, has a slight angle to it, not much. Very, very slight. That's another reason why I want to put the top in first, because then I can mount it and I can twist it wherever I need to go to get the lower one in. So if I put the lower on first and then try to put this up, it might not line up. The other thing, if you notice, this is centered. My old one was no longer centered, was it? So it's actually shifted or moved. So again, we talked about when we inspect the front suspension about looking things for being in the middle or even. We can see this is no longer in the middle. It wasn't made that way. That's because of wear. Okay, if you notice, that didn't want to go on real nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little bit of lube here. I always want to use a silicone lube, just like I did for my disc brake slides, because that won't damage the rubber. So let me get some lube for that. So here's some premium silicone grease. And I'm just going to put a little bit of silicone grease on the shaft here. And I can lower this down a little bit also. And it goes on. If you notice, these shocks are a hair longer than the old shocks. That's not uncommon to have slight length differences in the shocks. So I've got that set up. Now I'm going to tighten my upper bolts because I have everything set at the correct angle. So that way I know everything's going to set up. When I tighten this up, I'm not going to strain the bushing. Now I don't need to hammer on these. All I want to do is put it on forward. That's it. Now I'm going to go back and check with a hand wrench, make sure they're tight. I have a lot of experience with this tool, so I know they're okay. But again, I'm either going to put this together by hand. If you don't have a lot of experience with an impact gun, you will break bolts doing that. So this is a feel thing. You have to know when to get off it. One of the biggest mistakes entry-level techs make is they sit there, they're so afraid of leaving stuff loose, they sit there and hammer on the impact gun and they break things. So this is where just a quick zip. That impact gun puts out several hundred foot-pounds of torque. I only want to put about 30 foot-pounds of torque on those bolts. So I'm just going to go back now with a hand ratchet and make sure they're tight. Okay, so I've got a hand ratchet. I put it on, and they're both tight now. The one that I didn't hear hit the bottom, did need a little bit. The second one I put on, you could hear a difference in the hit. That one was torqued. So that's where you got to really use your ears. I knew I wasn't tight on the first one. I didn't want to go back with it with the impact gun. The second one I knew I was tight, but I checked them both by hand. So those are both tight. Now I'm going to put my lower bolt on. And there we go. This is self-locking nut, shoulder bolt. Many of these will come down right on the end of the shoulder stud. What I'm looking for is a fair amount of intrusion off the rubber, but not enough to where I'm squeezing it out to where I'm really putting stress on it. So again, nice amount of torque, self-locking nut, not going to come back off. This side's all set. Now we're ready to do the other side.